Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural edition of the RoAM Talk series, the book launch of Final Reckoning, an insider's view of the fall of Malaysia's Barisan Nasional government. My name is Aizen Teo. I am a senior researcher at Singapore History Consultants. I will be your master of ceremonies this evening. RoAM, or RoAM, stands for the Rise of Asia Museum. It is an up-and-coming museum that will be developed right here in this space by Journeys Private Limited, the management of Haw Par Villa. RoAM aims to chart the modern rise of Asia and Asian entrepreneurship and help the world understand the new evolving Asia. As we build RoAM, we are also organizing the RoAM Talk series, covering diverse topics such as history, politics, and society. We seek to provide a platform for local and overseas academics and experts to share their knowledge. This brings me to this evening's book launch. Final Reckoning is an insider's perspective of the major controversies that rocked the Najib Razak administration from the 2013 general election up to the night of 9 May 2018, when the Barisan Nasional government's 61-year rule over Malaysia came to an end. The book's author, Mr. Romen Bose, served for 6 years as political communications consultant to then Prime Minister Najib Razak, giving him a front row seat to the unfolding drama and chaos. Mr. Bose had exclusive access to top-secret meetings and key decision makers. With journalistic skills honed during his time as an international correspondent, he has crafted a political blockbuster of drama, intrigue, disaster, and the biggest financial scandal the world has ever seen, the 1MDB saga. To begin this evening's proceedings, I would like to call upon Mr. Jaya Ayadure, the Director of Journeys Private Limited, to say a few words. Mr. Jaya, please.
Thank you, Aizen. Good evening. I'm sorry, I just remembered that I can take off my mask, the freedom of talking without a mask. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural RoAM Talk series, which is being initiated today with the panel discussion and book launch of Mr. Romen Bose's book on Malaysian politics, The Final Reckoning. RoAM, as you know by now, is not short for Roman, all right? My name is Jaya, and I'm Director of Journeys Private Limited and its associated firm, Singapore History Consultants. Journeys took over Haw Par Villa in 2015. Unfortunately, because of construction delays and the global pandemic, there were too many obstacles for us to overcome, and we only really got started in July last year, July 2021. Why did we choose to take over such a challenging and awesome project like Haw Par Villa? Well, it was to help save a part of Singapore heritage and rescue a site that had been neglected by fellow Singaporeans. A place which was worthy, in reality, of being a UNESCO World Heritage Site. All the elements that made the Botanical Gardens a World Heritage Site, that criteria can also be met by Haw Par Villa for inscription. To get Singaporeans to rediscover Haw Par Villa, an unrecognized jewel in their midst, all right, one has to make it relevant, especially to locals. We had done this by creating new experiences within Haw Par Villa. Hell's Museum is but one example of how the park is being revitalized and its image making a change for the better. When we started this project, everyone that we spoke to about Haw Par Villa, getting them involved, getting them interested, would invariably state that they had visited Haw Par Villa as a child, that they had been dragged here by their parents to be terrified in the 10 courts, all right, so that they would know how to behave well, otherwise that same fate would face them in the afterlife. We got tired of people talking about the horrors of 10 courts, but being totally ignorant and disregarding the deep philosophies, the wonderful syncretic mingling and merging of Asian ideas, such as those from the Indian and Chinese civilizations, and even their contemporary relevance of how to meet the challenges of life today. I'm glad to announce that the museum has been very successful. All right, although modernity keeps interrupting my talk. In a relatively short time, the museum has not only helped increase the visitorship significantly from a monthly average of 19,000 visitors to above 30,000 people, but it has also had a phenomenal rise in the rankings of Singapore museums as managed by TripAdvisor. When the museum was launched on 28 October 2021, it was ranked about 980 out of 1,100 quality experiences. That was when it was opened, all right? 980 out of 1,100 quality experiences to be had in Singapore. However, it received so many rave reviews and feedback from visitors that in a short 4.5 months, it displaced the Battle Box, another one of our museums, into second place and became the highest ranked museum in the land today. It is also now the 12th highest ranked experience in Singapore. We suspect that ranking in terms of experiences will actually improve over the coming weeks. So change has started. Other examples include how we have changed the formerly long dormant Tiger car. It's almost a century old, a 1925 Buick. It has been restored, and its engine has for the first time been kicked back to life after more than 35 years. It will become a community project for a team of volunteers to maintain and drive around Haw Par Villa with its fashionable tiger head. Now, by the end of this month, there will be a sheltered culture courtyard outside that will introduce Singaporeans to regular cultural programs, showcasing and creating awareness of the evolution and revolution that's taking place in Asian music and dance. Today's inauguration of the RoAM Talks takes a similar step in making the park relevant, especially for locals. It will contribute to the intellectual life and increase the space available for intellectual discourse and for the exchange of ideas. Please note, here at Journeys and Singapore History Consultants, we do not define intellectuals in the parochial sense of only academic achievements. This definition of elites and intellectuals in our nation is too narrow and would not augur well for a mature and a broad-based development of our society. The old Soviet Union used to value its intelligentsia. It would cajole, nurture, and reward them, for they were the metal tip of a long wooden spear. The intelligentsia, scientists, poets, writers, and other cultural elites, were provided with dachas, and they would gather, drink, eat, have long, scintillating conversations into the night. Conversations that often had an impact and shaped their society. In some ways, it was the intelligentsia that kept a long, moribund political and economic system moving forward until its eventual collapse. If I could show the statue. I've got an image of a sculpture that for me represents a vision for Singapore. This beautiful statue by Salvador Dali called Homage to Newton under the UOB building along Battery Road. It's a surrealistic sculpture with large apertures in the head and torso, and the bank had purchased it as its vision to inspire Singaporeans on the type of society we want to become. When we asked children what they thought of it and its relevance to Singapore, well, children can be sometimes quite brutal, all right? And they said that the holes in the head and the torso meant that our society had no brains and no guts. I told you they can be brutal, all right? But what it actually represented, according to Dali, was that for a society to create a genius like a Newton, you need a society where there is an open mind and an open heart. Without these prerequisites, you can get to be a Sparta, but you will never be an Athens. The Rome Talk series is our attempt at helping in the nurture and development of an Athenian feel in our society. You do not do that by self-censoring and keeping to safe topics, but by providing space to allow people from all sectors of society to have a space where their views and ideas can be heard. It would help provide the yeast that will raise the bread. I'm happy that this journey begins with Roman's controversial book, one that covers the amazing and historical fall of UMNO in the last Malaysian general elections. I wish him well in his book series, and I wish him good health for a long time. A rather dangerous book to have written in Malaysia. I would also like to thank the moderator, Mr. Viswasadassivam, who is no stranger to Singapore society, and the panelists, Dr. Zokri and Mr. Ivan Paul Gravel, for their time and kindness in making today's panel discussion possible. They were supposed to be here in the flesh, but they have become victims of yet another set of victims of COVID. They've been not allowed to leave Malaysia, so we are Zooming them in instead. And trust me, there was no mass conspiracy in that regard. I certainly look forward to an exciting evening of ideas for all present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaya. The author of Final Reckoning, Mr. Romen Bose, is an international correspondent with over 22 years of reporting experience. Before setting up his own consultancy, Mr. Bose was head of Asian social media at IHS Markit and worked in Kuala Lumpur as a senior foreign correspondent with French news agency AFP. He was the founding president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Malaysia and a senior producer with the English language service of Al Jazeera International when it opened its regional base in Malaysia. Before this, Mr. Bose was the Indochina Bureau Chief for Channel News Asia and has also consulted for the United Nations. Mr. Bose has also researched and written extensively on the Second World War and its impact on Southeast Asia. I would now like to call upon Mr. Bose to say a few words about his book. Mr. Bose, please.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Aisen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to be here this evening for the launch of my book, Final Reckoning. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much to Jaya Jen, Savi, Miss Jia, Frank, Ison, Sherlyn, and the entire team at Journeys and Hauptpavilla for making this launch possible. And I want to especially thank Jia, who, despite having to deal with the shenanigans of a jumped-up teenage national serviceman more than 3 decades ago, and who still continues to put up with my nonsense, insisted on having this launch. A true friend. Thank you, Jia. And I must also thank, as I'm sure all of you know, Mr. Feedback himself, Mr. Vishwa Sadasivan, a very good friend who has kindly agreed to moderate the panel discussion, and Mr. Ivan Pal Singh Grewal, and Dr. Zokri Idris, who have kindly consented to be panelists of the discussion. I would also like to thank my wife, Bridget, my daughters, Lara, Olive, and Scylla, who could not be here in person, but are here in spirit, and my parents and my siblings, who are represented here today by my sister, Anita. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my publishers, Penguin Random House and Times Distribution, in all they have done to make the book a success. And most importantly, I must thank Ahmad, Ricky, and my team, as well as the numerous people mentioned in this book, and the many others who have asked to remain anonymous during the 13 years that I lived, worked, and consulted in Malaysia. All of them continue to fight for a better Malaysia because regardless of the political parties in power, they love their country above all else. I must admit that originally, I did not want to write this book. This was because of the traumatic events of the night when the BN government fell, and of all our efforts to try and ensure that UMNO and BN continued in power. However, in hindsight, maybe it was a good thing that the BN government collapsed on 9 May 2018. The racism, corruption, and structural instability of the 61-year-old administration was obvious for everyone to see. As Yeats puts it so well, the center could no longer hold, as the best lacked all conviction, while the worst were full of passionate intensity. But then, the hope that was held out for the Pakatan Harapan government to bring a new dawn for the country failed to take place. And the only achievement of the next backdoor government, the Perikatan National Government, that took power was to actually just remain in power for as long as they did. So what all this showed was that the system that had functioned for 61 years was rotten, and that those that came after it were no better. So it was a final reckoning of sorts for not just UMNO and BN, but for all Malaysians. It is clear that the system and structure has to change if Malaysia ever wants to have peace, stability, and prosperity for her people. And so I wrote the book to explain what I had witnessed during the decades that I was a journalist in Malaysia and whilst observing what took place in the corridors of power. The book's aim was to provide readers with my perspective on one of the most seminal moments in Malaysia's history in recent times. And it was also written as a cautionary tale on what it takes to be in power and how one can lose it as well. But I hope that the key message that readers take away from this book is thus: that after 64 years in power, or after 64 years of its history, Malaysia as a country and as a people need a reset. There needs to be a reset of the fundamental political compact among the races, a need to reset the country's political and economic agenda, and a reset of the way society interacts in general. Taking a line out of that famous fantasy TV series, The Game of Thrones, it is time for Malaysians to break the wheel of power. Malaysians have shown that they have the courage to do what it takes and the resilience to take it on the chin, to recover, and to come back stronger than ever. I believe that the current state of affairs has now also blurred racial and economic lines. Many are now more interested in how the country and its people can have stability, peace, and prosperity. So for those of you who remember the heyday of the typewriter, I paraphrase the famous typing drill that many of us learned. Now, ladies and gentlemen, is the time for all good men and women to come to the aid not of their party, but of their country. The road ahead is not easy amid the fractured nature of politics within the country, but I believe Malaysians are a pragmatic people who can and will rise to the challenge of making their country not only a regional, but a global economic powerhouse in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bose. We now come to the panel discussion moderated by Mr. Viswa Sadasivan. Mr. Sadasivan has over 35 years of media experience. He is no stranger to Singapore TV, being the face of breakthrough news and current affairs programs such as Talking Point, Feedback, and Today in Parliament. Mr. Sadasivan is an accomplished and sought-after moderator and a seasoned chair of panel discussions and regional forums. He was a discussion leader at the St. Gallen Symposium in Switzerland and chaired sessions at UNESCO's inaugural Global Conference on Persons with Disabilities in 2015. Mr. Sadasivan has also interviewed Asia's top business and political leaders, including the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's first Prime Minister, the late Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia's first Prime Minister, and Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Malaysia's longest-serving Premier. Mr. Sadasivan, the floor is yours.
When Romen Bose asked me if I would moderate a panel discussion for the launch of this book on the fall of BN, I reflected on it for a few minutes. The key question on my mind was this: it sounds like a paid PR campaign for the corrupt Najib and his cronies. Do I want to get involved in this? So it was a serious question I had to ask myself. But I've known Romen since the launch of Channel News Asia 23 years ago, when he was as loud and he was larger than life then, in more senses of the word then. I was there at his wedding. Should this not matter anymore? Shouldn't these things matter? Friendship, the trust that comes with friendship. Therefore, I reckoned that I should be consistent in my orientation towards him, my affection for him, my respect for him. He's always been a man of his word, a person for whom integrity matters. I remember telling myself, especially when he was CNA Indochina correspondent, I saw you and I was impressed. He wasn't afraid to swim against the tide. In fact, I think he kind of relished it. Truth mattered to this man, and truthfulness to himself even more. For argument's sake, even if the book is a PR piece for Najib's campaign, should I dismiss it as being worthless? My own journalism background told me that this is an opportunity for me to hear a different perspective, one that I don't need to agree with, but listen to it anyway. Isn't that the spirit of RoAM? You know, we tend to brush aside things that we can't comprehend, without realizing that the reason why we can't comprehend is because we don't have an open mind. Not because we don't have the intellect to process what we can't comprehend. I told Romen that I would be delighted to moderate the discussion. My condition was to be allowed to question the content. His response, but of course, I expect no less from you, sir. Since then, I've had a few friends and relatives, some very respected individuals, who cautioned me not to ruin my credibility. They really think my credibility is so fragile, by being associated with this character. You are referred to as a character. That's a compliment. Who's been paid a huge amount to do this in the name of journalism. The truth of the matter is, I don't know whether you were paid. And I don't care. Because we're going to have a good session later. And I think the public will decide whether they want to believe what you say or not. My job is to make sure that some of those questions, inconvenient questions, actually are allowed to surface, with your help. It's precisely in this spirit of welcoming contrary viewpoints that I'd like to conduct this evening session, right? Journalistic integrity, open-mindedness, and being honorable, right? With that, I'd like to introduce the panelists. You don't need any further introduction, okay? Ivanpal Singh Gruwal, over there. Can you give us a big wave, Ivan? He hails from Malaysia. He's an advocate and solicitor there. He is also a columnist for the Star Online news portal. His bi-weekly column is called Making Progress. He was previously Special Officer to Tan Sri Dr. Kosukun, former Chief Minister of Penang, and Executive Director of Gerakan, the political party, linked and Gerakan's linked think tank called Cedar Institute. He was also the acting chief administrator of the Gerakan National Headquarters. Ivanpal was formerly also pro tem president of an NGO called the Organization for National Empowerment, or ONE. Between 2014 and 2018, Ivanpal served as political secretary to Datuk Sri Mas Yew Kiong, first in the Prime Minister's Department and later in the Ministry of Plantation, Industries and Commodities in Malaysia. He co-authored the book Managing Success in Unity, published by the Department of National Unity and Integration in 2010. Ivanpal is also vice chairman of the Selangor chapter of Parti Gerakan Rakyat Malaysia. Please welcome Ivanpal, please. Dr. Zokri Idris has held various academic positions in international relations as the Deputy Dean of Student Affairs at the Management and Science University in Malaysia. He had served as a senior faculty member of the Faculty of Business Management and Professional Studies. His research focuses on the changing nature of diplomacy and sovereignty of developing nations, especially in Malaysia. This led to specific research to explore leadership and diplomacy in international relations. He co-founded ARUS, A-R-U-S, an avenue to nurture talent and empower Malaysian youth. Currently, he serves in the Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs Malaysia as its Director of External Affairs. Please welcome Dr. Zokri Idris. So it gives me pleasure to ask, not you, why are you taking the mic? Please follow instructions. I'd like to invite Zokri. Could you go first? Your impressions of the book in no more than 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Viswa, and thank you, the organizing committee, for having us and for having me, actually, in this wonderful occasion. Now, I'd like to start my review by saying that there are two things that makes me appreciate about the book. Now, the first thing that makes me appreciate the book is that the book actually adds to another testimony on how 9 May actually happens in Malaysia. Of course, we are referring back to the collapse of Barisan Nasional for 61 years ruling the government. And even as we speak right now, people are still been speculating that led to the fall of Barisan Nasional. And Final Reckoning is one of the another testimony that explains how it happened to us, the Malaysians. Now, the second thing that makes me appreciate about the book, it gives us a different persona of Datuk Sri Najib Razak. From the insider's perspective, of course, the whole world's talking about him. Malaysians are judging him, as well as other countries are judging him. Even the court is actually having its trial on him. But the book actually also portrays how Najib Razak is also one of the visionary leaders that Malaysia had in our history. So it gives a balanced perspective of a person despite the scandals that's been lingering around him until today. Now, Viswa and ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make 3 important points of this book. Now, the book actually highlights to us the fault lines that led to the fall of Barisan Nasional government. And I think in chapter 10, the author had actually summarized 10 factors that actually led to the fall, or that actually led to how 9 May happens. And it's very interesting for us to see how actually the current government, led by Prime Minister Ismail Sabri, learned from its lessons and able to address to these 10 factors if the current government wishes to retain in the next elections. As far as we are concerned, now these 10 indicators or factors has not been taken really seriously in terms of having narratives, in terms of utilization of social media and technology, how to address UMNO disunity as well as the lack of coordination of BN. This has to be paid attention and has to be addressed. So the question is whether the current government addressed that. On to my second point very quickly, it's also very interesting for us to see how this book, The Final Reckoning, able to usher the Malaysians to the future politics of our country. Now, bearing in mind, 9 May happens when we had a clear division of Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Harapan. As we speak right now, the evolution of the Malaysian politics has made all of these political alliances becoming more fluid. Not only that we are having Barisan Nasional at the moment, as well as Pakatan Harapan, we have seen and how the collapse of Pakatan Harapan to form Perikatan Nasional, which absorbed PAS as well as Gerakan into the coalition. And I think what's happening tomorrow in Johor will be a very good testament for us to see whether that this working model works and sustained in the future. If we assume that BN leads and BN had the majority, then it's easy for us to see that what's going to happen to the country. But if Johor elections tomorrow forecast to us the results that neither of this party holds a majority, it brings us back to the cycle where the political instability is something that Malaysia has to face for the next few years, or even for the next few elections. For my last point on this book is that, and it's very interesting to see because Romen had posed 2 hypotheses for Malaysia to have political stability. The first is the Malays and Chinese to be united together to form a stable government. And the second hypothesis is whether the Malays unite together and form a Malay coalition in its entirety. Now, among these 2 hypotheses, it's very enlightening for us to see now which one is more feasible and which one carries a higher likelihood for it to happen. Either Malaysia will see that Malays and Chinese unite together, or we will see that the Malays actually united together as a superpower race, if I may use that terminologies, to form a political stability. So these are the 3 points that perhaps I probably could raise for now for us to discuss and decipher in the discussion later. Just 30 seconds more, Viswa, if I still have time. What I wish to see in this book, and I don't think that has been captured by the author, is how actually Najib Razak perceives his prime ministership, bearing in mind of the Razak's legacy. of course, that we know that Razak has left a very wonderful reputation. The family itself is reputation, family. And I wonder how actually Najib Razak sees this when he actually heralded the politics ever since he was in his 20s, all the way to become the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Because I'm comparing this with Nazir Razak, what's in the name, because Nazir started the book by saying how important it is, Razak, the name of Razak to him, that has propelled him to do what he's actually doing today. And I'm also wondering what is actually in the name of Razak to Najib for him to actually herald politics at such a young age, as well as to emerge as the Prime Minister of Malaysia. I probably will stop there for now. I'm not sure whether I've taken the time, but I think those are the 3 points I would like to start off when I'm reviewing the book. Thank you, Viswa.
Thank you very much, Zokri. For those of you who may not be aware, Najib Razak's father, Tun Razak, was the second Prime Minister of Malaysia, who took over from the Tunku, just in case you didn't know that. YVonne, over to you, YVonne Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Viswa, and hi, Roman. First of all, when Roman told me he's going to write this book, my first reaction to him is, are you serious? Do you want to throw yourself into what is a very muddy, political cesspool that we currently have in Malaysia? But at the same time, I think it's good that he had the courage that so many others lacked to record for posterity his view as to how the single most successful political collision in modern political history lost power. And but before I start, I think it's only fair I preface with how I came to know Roman in 2009. So I was asked to attend a discussion with some eminent journalists, one of them being Roman. And we both are history buffs, and he's written many books about World War II. So instantly we hit it off. And some months later, Roman gives me a call. Now, those of us who know Roman, he has a lot to say. And when he doesn't have much to say, there's a problem. So he calls me and says, can you quickly go delete all the posts on all your posts on Facebook? Because it's given a couple of people in the Prime Minister's office some heartburn. So I actually had to go and look, and I realized that I've been quite unflattering about Barisan Nasional in my university days. So I took Roman's advice. I deleted what I had to delete. And much later on, he actually told me the reason for doing so. And that too after a couple of years in truly characteristic Roman style. So that being the case, I think the book, to me, serves as a personal reckoning as well. Partly because I was part of the Najib administration in 2 stints between 2009 and 2012, and then again from 2014 to 2018. And I think a lot of what happened behind the scenes is something, despite me being a fairly senior member of a minister's office, did not even know. And a lot of it I only came to know after I read the book. So it was quite interesting to see that how deep or Roman was, or in the thick of things, as we would say. But more importantly, I think it is a fair take about what happened. I think while people are right to focus on the deficiencies, on the 1MDB scandal and etc., there has been no real effort to talk about the positives as well. And I think a lot of people today around the world, and I think a lot of them in Malaysia as well, are pretty confounded as to how has Najib remade himself into the most popular politician today, despite being convicted by the High Court and the Court of Appeal. And his appeal is pending before the federal court now. So a lot of people want to understand this, and I think if you read the book, you kind of get an idea as to where this popularity is emanating from. And I think it comes from the fact that the general feeling in Malaysia is that, yeah, fine, everyone may not be the best, but at least during his time, we could survive. It's a very simple, simplistic way to look at things, but somehow or other it resonates in people. And I think secondly, by reading the book, or previously by knowing Najib, by working under him, you know, he's the quintessential Malay gentleman. He's not confrontational, and he's accustomed to the finer things in life because he's what we call in Malay a bangsawan, or the upper class, because of his royal breakdown from Pahang and being the son of the second Prime Minister. But the Najib you see now, going to the ground, meeting people, interacting, shedding the protocol, which was something he couldn't do previously. That remake, I think, is part of it. I think Romen discusses it, as well as the points in which why he concludes that Najib's opponents should be fearful, because anything is possible in politics. I myself, in my column that I wrote in December 29, 2 days before New Year's Eve, I did a slight review of Romen's book as well. And what I concluded is that we will definitely not have seen the back of Najib. That part I agree with Romen. But I think at the same time, we have to ask ourselves the tough questions in Malaysia. And the tough questions are, what kind of leadership do we want in the future? What kind of country do we want in the future? And this whole orgy of racial politics, sorry I call it that, but it is that, has to be looked at thoroughly. And I think both the majority and the minority in Malaysia must ask themselves, is this the country we want to be going forward? Is race and religion going to be part of the national conversation at every stage, or is it going to be development, good governance, judicial independence, etc.? So I think, in a way, Romen's book helps us or point us in the direction of these larger questions. So I'll stop there. I think I've definitely taken more than 5 minutes, and I apologize for that. And I look forward to the discussion after this.
Thank you, YVonne. And you've highlighted the importance of having Malaysians present in this discussion. Are there any Malaysians here in the audience? Oh, not bad. Okay, so it's so important, and it's interesting because last night I was at a book launch, and it was about multiracial Singapore. And I contributed an article there. And one of the points that came through in the press conference was that we have to be very thankful that in Singapore, we have eschewed communal politics. In the strictly political sense, communal-based political parties are not allowed in Singapore. I think that was one of the best things, one of the wisest things that we did in Singapore, because it's a slippery slope. It's very hard for you to get out of that. So much as we're talking about injecting multiracialism, one Malaysia and so on, there are so many people who actually benefit from status quo, who actually don't see any value in backpedaling. That's the challenge we face. And that's actually my first question here. Najib is portrayed very much as a multiracialist. I was aware that he was a multiracialist, but I didn't know to what extent he was committed to that until I read the book. And there's a particular part of the book that was particularly instructive, and if I may be allowed to quote. Page 56. From day one, Najib attempted to rebuild a unified country that had been divided by the Wahhabi-like approach of his predecessors, which had seen a perceived Islamization of non-Muslim rights and an increasing alienation of the gotong royong kampong-style multiracial approach of Malaysians who had grown up in the 1960s and 1970s. The easygoing relationship among Malays and non-Malays had now been replaced with a stricter version of Islam as preached by Mahathir and his deputy Anwar in the 1990s that had resulted in a polarization of the races. Najib's aim was to remove those barriers and bring the races back in harmony once again through his One Malaysia campaign. My question is, why is it that he was not able to do much, even though he was committed to this?
I can use the mic now, can I? All right, thank you. All right. Vishwa, that's a very, very interesting question. It's a complex answer, but I'll try and make it not so complex. Najib, when he came in, had come up with numerous policies to address the inequalities among the races. One of the fundamental policies he came up with was the new economic model. And that was to actually reduce the Bumiputra level of equity in the economy, increase the non-Bumiputra equity level. These were plans that he had come up with. They were all drawn up. They were introduced to the people. But they were not eventually implemented. Now, why were they not implemented? Because he did not have the support of the party to implement these policies. And why didn't he have the support of the party? Because at that point in time, the party was not controlled by the Prime Minister. The party was controlled by a former Prime Minister who had a lot more influence in the party than the current Prime Minister. In fact, the former Prime Minister, Mahathir Mohamad, was the one that toppled his successor, Abdullah Ahmad Badawi, and tried to install Najib as the Prime Minister. So Mahathir himself was viewed as still God within the party itself. So when Najib had come up with these various policies, these did not jive with the perspectives of the various warlords within the party that had been appointed by Mahathir at that point in time. These individuals were very, very reluctant to change anything. And Najib was fighting against the tide. He was fighting against these individuals to actually change, to actually implement these policies. And it was an uphill challenge. I'm sure Zokri and Ivan.
So something more specific. You had recommended, Roman, to Najib when he was Prime Minister that Malaysia should have a national reconciliation plan. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Could you tell us a little bit more about this blueprint, which went on to be announced but not implemented?
Yeah. Again, let me give you a little bit of a background to that. And the background to that is GE 13. Yeah. When Najib had come up with the new economic model, all of these policies, these were all presented to the public as things that he wanted to implement. GE 13 comes, and the people who were effectively going to benefit from these policies voted against Najib, voted against BN. They supported the opposition. So the core base of the individuals who would benefit from these policies abandoned him.
You're talking about the Chinese, predominantly.
Yeah, effectively, the non-Malays, not just the Chinese, the non-Malays.
The Indians didn't count. I mean, statistically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't be diplomatic about these things, huh? Okay.
Not really, but...
Is that a voice of God from somewhere? Okay. Please go ahead.
As a result, the people who did end up voting for Najib were your conservative Malays. So as a result, the political ground literally shifted under his feet. So at that point, real politics comes in. You have these amazing plans that you want to implement for equality, for greater prosperity for the country, because you can see how this is going to help. But if the people who voted you in are not supportive of that, you obviously have to change. And so as a result, a lot of these plans that were going to be implemented had to be shelved because there was just no longer any political support for it.
And so, since that failed, there was another proposal, right? A more ground-up proposal, creation of an NGO Yeah, and YVonne Paul was involved in that as well, right, YVonne?
That's right.
So maybe
Yeah.
the two of you can share. Maybe, Roman, you could start by saying how did the idea germinate?
Sure. So fundamentally, after GE13, there was a huge gap between the non-Malays and the Malays. There was very, very strong racial tensions on the ground. There was a need for national reconciliation in the country because it had become very, very polarized. There were individuals who were fighting for Malay rights, individuals who were fighting for Chinese rights, and there would be enormous, there'd be polemics, and this would basically frighten the heartland. The Malays and the Chinese in the heartland of Malaysia would be terrified, fearful that one or the other would be taking advantage of the other side. And as a result, there had to be a rapprochement among the races. So we proposed a national, reconciliation plan to get everybody back again, to get people to start working with one another. And one was born out of that idea. One was an NGO. The idea of one was to get these individuals, get all the races to start working with one another, but not funded by the government. The idea was to get this to be an organic development, and I'll let YVonne actually...
One stands for Organization for National Empowerment.
Exactly.
It's a ground-up, it's an NGO which was set up, and Ashman, who is Razak's son,
That's right.
took an interest in leading it. YVonne Paul, I believe, was roped in to guide him.
That's right.
And there was also this other lady called Hannah Kam,
That's right.
who wrote a book about her experience in starting that. So maybe you could hear a little bit more about this exercise, YVonne.
Thank you.
YVonne, sorry.
Yeah. So I think I got a call from Roman. Everything starts with a call from Roman. And he said to me, look, I want to set up this NGO. There are a couple of young guys. I'm not very old myself, still quite young. And he said, could you help guide them? And so I came in purely in a pro tem basis. And then after that, Hannah, Ashman, and another guy, Denny, they took over. Essentially, the idea was, Viswa, was for us to build something ground up, organic, and then amplify it to show people that actually at the granular grassroots level, Malaysians don't have problems with one another. The problems emanate when the venom is injected by the politicians and when politicians play in the fault lines simply because they want to get votes. And it's not unique to Malaysia. I mean, you just look at what's happening in India today. You see the exact same thing. So we were hoping to graduate from the bare knuckle, everyday politics and to actually get young people together and engender some kind of hope. And I think we succeeded to some level. But the weight of national issues, I think, kind of drowned everything out in the run-up to the general election.
Okay, thank you. Zokri, anything to add?
I think the whole basic idea is about the level of insecurity of one race to another, that the Malay is feeling insecure towards other races, the non-Malays are also feeling insecure towards the Malays. But to add on what I think Roman has mentioned on the NRP and the outcome of the GE13, clearly we can see the frustration of Najib Razak for all of the things that he has done. The Chinese voters still punish BN in reducing the majority. And I think that's why he came up with a statement, apa lagi Cina mau. And I think that statement further divides the nation. And I think that, we are actually going into the gap which is even deeper and deeper into the abyss. We still have not settled about the issue of Dongzhong and Chinese educations. I'm not sure whether Hindraf have actually reached the amicable settlement. So I think the level of insecurity is something that we really have to discuss in order for Malaysia to go on and move forward. How do we battle insecurities from one race to another?
Right. So essentially, he felt betrayed. Would it be too strong?
Yeah.
He felt betrayed.
Yeah.
By the very people who was trying to help.
That's right.
Right. The Chinese specifically. If I could just move forward, there's quite a bit to cover. That's why I'm kind of. It gets more exciting. We are moving towards 1MDB. Let's go to the 2011 Bersih Rally, right? Bersih is a coalition for clean and fair elections. And the Bersih Rally, there were several rallies, but 2011 was the one that you were involved in.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
I couldn't help sensing dislike from you. In the way you described the Bersih Rally, there was clear dislike for the rally, for the people who were driving the rally. Anwar was one of them, right? Could you share with us why? Because I remember in Singapore, we were cheering the Bersih. We were cheering the Bersih movement. I mean, Singapore style in coffee shops, quietly, but never taking to the streets. But you have this disdain for the Bersih. Why?
Well, it's not a disdain. I mean, the thing is, as a journalist who worked for 22 years, it's cynicism with any organization, any group. And the cynicism with Bersih was very, very real in the sense that you had a group that was basically led by political leaders. They were not independent individuals. They were not individuals that were just coming out of grassroots. They were all linked to specific opposition groups. So as a result, they had an agenda, that they had something to grind.
So what's wrong with that?
Nothing, but you have to make that clear. What was made clear was that they were an independent organization, free of any control, any political agenda, when the reality was that they were mainly made up of politicians. So that, already made me question what exactly Bersih wanted to do.
No, but the truth, realistically speaking, as
Sure.
a journalist, realism is important, isn't it?
Of course.
Have you come across any movement that has no linkage to politics? Seriously, let's not be naive here.
Sure.
You
Any organization can have links. That is fine.
Yeah.
But you need to make it clear, right? You cannot be identified as an independent organization. You have to identify your affiliation. You have to come up and say, look, I'm affiliated with these guys, and I'm saying this.
No, but a lot of the people who took part in Bersih, I don't think were affiliated to any particular party. There could be some individuals who were.
That was the problem, you see. The problem was lots of individuals saw Bersih as an independent organization, although the leadership was not independent. So they believed, rightfully, they believed that this organization was going to represent free and fair elections. The problem comes then in the demands of Bersih. Bersih had, I think, 14 demands that they presented to the government. The government immediately implemented 13 of those demands. The 14th demand, the government said immediately after the election, they would implement it. So more than 90% of the demands being made by Bersih, the government had implemented. Yet, the NGO decided, no, that's not enough. We're going to have street demonstrations.
Okay.
So you have to ask yourself. Any rational person has to ask themselves. It cannot be a situation of everything or nothing.
Okay, but you would admit that there was police brutality.
Most definitely.
Right?
Most
we
definitely.
Here too. We were shocked by the level of police brutality.
And that is the problem. That is the problem because both sides were in the wrong in this situation. There was no one that was right.
But it was ridiculous for the Prime Minister, right, to go out there and go completely against what is obvious and actually say that the police were the victim.
And that is what
Najib openly said the police were the victim,
Yeah.
and he put the entire responsibility of Bersih with the opposition.
Exactly, and that is what I told Najib myself. I told him that exact same thing, that it is not just the police, it is not just the opposition, it is the police, because I was in the demonstration itself. I was water cannoned, I was tear gas, I was almost drowned in a fountain. And these were people who were out there who were unhappy with the situation. They were stoked, but that's not the issue. The issue is not just that they were stoked, but when the police decided to take action against these individuals, they went overboard. They didn't just try and stop these individuals. They effectively, if you ask me, I believe they brutalized many of these demonstrators. That was not part of their remit.
No. So what is the responsibility of the Prime Minister? What's the responsibility of a responsible Prime Minister when this happens?
My understanding in any such situation would be Anybody who is in charge has to take responsibility for what happens on the ground. That's fundamental.
Right. And why didn't he?
Because I believe he was not given the right information. I believe that the individuals below him who were running the various operations did not feed back the right information. And this is what I found out as a journalist. I found out that he was not getting the right details. He was not getting the actual details of what was going on. So I drafted a paper in the end. When I did meet the Prime Minister, I presented to him and I said, look, this is what actually transpired on the ground. He read it and he said, wow, I was completely unaware.
No, exact words. There are many things in your paper that I did not know about. While I understand that he was given wrong information, but as the Prime Minister, dealing with something as with such powerful optics, you can't then say, I was given the wrong information.
Well, that's the thing. Publicly, obviously, the statement made was that, it was the opposition's fault. Now, once you say that, can you backtrack? That's obviously going to affect your reputation. That's obviously going to affect. So this is the situation. Once we made it clear, once I told him, look, this is the situation. I said, what you need now is you need a team that's telling you what the heck's going on the ground. Because it's clear from the teams that you have, from the individuals that you have, that you're not getting the right information.
Yeah. YVonne Pal, you were involved in this as well, in a brief to, not face-to-face, but you wrote a paper.
Yes, but actually I think I can corroborate some of what Roman's saying because right after the Bersih Rally, the Prime Minister left for Europe. I think the Bersih Rally was somewhere the 9th or 10th of July. And he had been due to meet Pope Benedict in Rome on the 19th of July to establish diplomatic relations with the Vatican. And my boss at that time, Tan Sri Kosugun, was involved. So when we met the Prime Minister in Rome, I still remember pulling out my old BlackBerry and showing him the YouTube videos of the police brutalizing the protesters in his hotel room in Rome. And my ex-boss was trying to explain to him and say, look, this was what was going on. And he was genuinely shocked because he kept saying, no, my Home Minister told me everything is okay. It's the protesters to provoke the police, etc. But I remember one video, very emphatic, was a policeman pulling a female journalist by the hair. And that became the defining image, similar to like the burning monk against the South Vietnamese in the run-up to the Vietnam War. That became the emphatic image. And that is what I think at that point of time we had lost significant credibility. So I reached out to Roman. I said, this is a big problem. You have the year of the Prime Minister. This is something you should definitely take it up with him.
And what was his response?
His response was that, again, he said information must percolate properly. And at the same time, I think he had a sit down with the Home Minister and said, look, this cannot happen ever again.
Okay. Zokri, anything to add?
Street rally in Malaysia, I think, was something that was never positive in our country, So I think when Bersih happened in 2011, the country was not even prepared to have this series of street rally in Malaysia. What we had was 1998, and it was very, 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 very dirty and very bad at that time. So again, the police probably did not have such a protocol and SOP. The Home Minister was also alluded into this. So no one actually understands what it means to have a street rally. But I must say the situation is changing right now. We are becoming more familiarized of having street rally and street protests. The degree of violence is reducing from the early days until now. As you can see, Lawan happened, and it was quite peacefully, or even more peaceful than the Bersih. So I think as a young nation, we learned to the bad atrocities to make things better in the country. I'm not saying that what things that are happening in Bersih should have happened, but I think we've learned a lot and we make things better, especially in the recent times in our country.
So, sorry, is there anyone with a question specifically about Bersih? Anyone? Or a comment even? Okay, if not, actually I'd like to say that one of the things that struck me, right through your book is how, I can't think of a better word, but how indecisive Prime Minister Najib was as a Prime Minister. We saw a repeat of this. This is my view. We saw a repeat of this in the way he handled the MH370 disappearance. It was indecisiveness. Him and Hishamuddin, who was Defense Minister and Acting Transport Minister, there was. I mean, in a crisis situation like that, not having a press conference immediately, something as large and powerful and optically high signature, that's bad judgment, right? I think there was an improvement in the way he handled the second Malaysian Airlines incident in Ukraine, right? When he was shot down, MH17. Yes. I think he was a bit more decisive, but I think as a character, it is a flaw that I'm seeing. He's too nice a guy.
Well, I mean, and I think this is the theme that fundamentally runs through my book. He's a gentleman. And I think that, that ends up being a pro and a con.
There's a line between gentleman and blur, no? I mean, don't describe blurness as gentlemen. Well, all of us are gentlemen. No?
Well, the thing is, it's a very, very fine line between blurness and gentlemanness. You see, this is the issue. And fundamentally, when you look at Najib and MH370, this was the first time ever they had faced such a crisis. No one, in recent or ever in Malaysian history, never had a plane gone missing. Right? And it's also the individual advisors around the Prime Minister who were advising him. And these individuals told him that he shouldn't speak to the media, he should wait until he gets more facts, more details, then address the media. But when a plane goes missing, there are no facts. You have to deal, and anyone who understands crisis management, I mean, as journalists, we said that we've seen all these crises. You have to get ahead of the story. You need to address the media. You have to get your version out there so people understand what happens. And what happened, unfortunately, was because of the delay, he did not get his version, the government didn't get its version out, and everyone was sitting at the press conference. All these journalists were sitting from 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning at the Sama-Sama Hotel at KLIA until 11, 12 o'clock at night. Yeah. With nothing else to do. And as you and I know, we journalists, when we sit down and we've got nothing else to do, we become devils, and all kinds of ideas go in our head. So that's where the idea for conspiracies came through, with the government not answering for 12, 13, 14 hours, not responding to this. Everyone was wondering, what are they hiding? What's going on? And as a result, this is why today you've got so many conspiracies. Of course, that is also due to the fact that the plane is still missing. Yeah. But so many conspiracies.
But all that aside, right? He's also not someone who learns from mistakes.
Oh, I think he learned. He definitely learned.
Yeah, but he learned, but he improved the way he managed MH17. But I don't think he learned enough from these that actually presented themselves as full dress rehearsal for 1MDB.
Well, I think, everybody's human, man. I mean, depends at what level you learn.
But after a point...
Can I just interject? Can I just ask a question to clarify what Viswa is asking? What's the relation between the plane incidents with 1MDB?
What's the relation? Oh, no. We're talking about... I mean, it's of course, it's not another plane incident, but it is a crisis where the instincts are the same. There shouldn't be a delay in responding to powerful allegations that strike at the foundation of your integrity.
I think, Vishwa, what you are talking about is effectively the problem with the strategic communications policy. And that was fundamentally what I was trying to fight and trying to resolve within the administration itself.
So with that, let's segue in the interest of time, huh? Because we do want to have a fairly detailed discussion about 1MDB. Sure. Because you did spend a lot in discussing that. And I think a lot of us are interested in that 1MDB issue. So, 2015, right? April. Dr. Mahathir made a damning attack, and he stated categorically that 42 billion
Hilang.
ringgit hilang, right? That means gone missing, suggesting that it went to his pocket, right? Now, he did not respond. I mean, when such a powerful allegation is made against you, not in your person per se, but in you as the Prime Minister of Malaysia, he did not respond. How is that possible? Didn't stop there, right? 2 months later came the biggest bombshell, the Wall Street Journal. Tom Wright and Bradley Hope came up with this expose, which claimed that nearly US $700 million from 1MDB was siphoned to Najib's account. Now, it was subsequently made clear to you, because you had to go and challenge him and ask him, why are you keeping quiet? That's when he told you that it wasn't his personal account, it was the account that he held as the president of UMNO.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Now, it may sound like a technicality, but there's a distinct difference between the two. And of course, he was advised that it is all right for this to happen by none other, according to your book, by none other than Zeti, who is the governor of the Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara. Now, these are important facts. If they are factually accurate, why wouldn't a person in his place see the need to defend himself, not so much because of himself, because he represents the country to the world? Why didn't he do it? It blows my mind.
So I'll address both issues, and I think Zokri and YVonne might understand this, but I think the Singapore audience might not really understand this. This is a concept of Malay adat, okay? So when you have an elder, a senior, you do not question or you don't even respond when your seniors criticize you. You accept all criticisms with an open heart. This is culture. When Mahathir began his attacks on Najib refused to respond to it. Why? Because his predecessor, Pak Abdullah Ahmad Badawi, same thing. When Mahathir began attacking him, Pak said nothing. The term elegant silence was coined at that point. I don't know how many people remember that, but Pak elegant silence. Why didn't Pak respond? Because you do not respond to your senior. You don't get in an altercation with him because it's unseemly, and the Malay ground cannot accept that. So, at the very beginning, that's exactly what Najib did. Firstly, you do not respond to your senior because he's your senior. He's the one, who set up the entire country, who has done so much. You keep quiet. Secondly, as far as Najib was concerned, that was 1MDB. He was not involved with what was going on with 1MDB. That was a company that did all of this. He's the Prime Minister running the country. Why does he need to answer that?
He was chairman.
He was chairman of the board of advisors, not of the executive committee. So those are two different committees. And we also have to understand, at that point in time, none of us knew about the various corporate, complex shell companies, left, right, and center, all of that stuff being set up. None of that was there. All that we saw was Mahathir on a daily basis attacking Najib, making these allegations, and we went through the book. Eventually, we went through the books, the 1MDB books, and the top 4 accountancy firms in the world, right, went through these books and said, yeah, they're fine. So, if the top 4 accountancy firms in the world say that these books are fine, I accept that, right?
So,
hold on. Let me finish. So, the books they say are fine, right? So we create a defense based on that books. Yet today, we find out that all these 4 firms have now paid the Malaysian government, several $100 million because of their failures in certifying these various books.
So, for the benefit of the audience here, where did the 700 million come from? It's been said that it's from the Saudi king, right? Which he uses to fund Muslim countries.
Well, that is what Najib told me when I asked him on the night after the Wall Street Journal came out with the articles. He said this money was from the Saudi Arabian king. The King Abdullah had basically provided him with these funds to use. And to be accurate, 700 million came into the country. 620 or 630 million was then sent back out, because only 40 or 50 million was used by Najib for the elections. The rest of the money he did not use, and so he returned it to King Abdullah because he was in the belief that if he returned the money, when he needed more money for GE14, he could hit up the Saudis again.
And it was actually a restricted fund. It was restricted for the use in the election, right? Now, it
was for political uses, yeah.
That's a completely different issue. I mean,
yeah.
$700 million given by one sovereign nation to another.
Yeah.
It's a never mind. But I'm sure there's a lot more coming from that place. Okay. What's interesting is, in your book, in the chapter on 1MDB, you named 3 individuals who were corrupt.
Oh, I named the governor of Bank Negara.
You named them for being corrupt.
That's right.
And suggested a conspiracy to forcibly remove the sitting Prime Minister.
That's right.
Zeti Akhtar Aziz, then Bank Negara governor.
That's right.
Abdul Ghani Patel, then Attorney General. And Abu Qasim Muhammad, then Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, or ACC.
That's right.
Chief Commissioner.
That's right.
Right. This book was officially published in middle of December.
14th December.
Okay. Have any of them sued you yet?
It has now been, 3 months since December, almost,
Now, for me, that is one of the most powerful, most telling parts of this book, because you named them, and these were the 3
Vishwa, no, I don't only name, I lay out the plot.
Yeah.
I describe how they were planning to put a balaclava on Najib's head in the cabinet meeting and drag him out, handcuffed, into a Black Maria. So I have given details.
And including Mohiddin.
Oh, yes.
Mohiddin's involvement.
Most definitely.
Right, he was involved in this. It was shocking, the details that are captured in this book. But, it was so shocking that I couldn't believe that it actually happened. Right?
Well, you see, that's it, Vishwa. If it didn't happen, I should be having lawsuits up my, you know what?
Your nostril.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. No, but it's shocking, it's very telling, and none of them, anyway, they were removed, except Zeti was not extended.
Yeah.
The other 2 were removed. So it's a lot happening there, and maybe at this point in time, I want to hear from our Malaysian panelists. Any comments on what we discussed so far, anything to add on our understanding of 1MDB?
Well, I think 1MDB remains a Gordian knot for all of us. It is definitely an issue for Barisan Nasional. It's definitely an issue for Najib, and a lot has been written. I think Romen gives us the other side of the story, because every story has 2 sides. The question is to have both sides laid out for you. We had the book by the 2 Wall Street Journal individuals, the big fat whale. And I think then you had Romen's version, and I think no one from Najib's side, not that I'm saying Romen is on Najib's side, no one is given the Najib perspective of things. But I think, Viswa, you make an important point, and I think that was something very hard for a lot of us to grapple with, was that how is it that so much ended up in the account of the Prime Minister? and why was this money given, and what were the conditions attached, sovereignty and other issues. And I think these were definitely something that played on our mind, and we found out actually when we read the Age newspaper. I remember that morning vividly, as before cabinet meeting, my boss would meet, the minister that I work for would meet with me, and we would discuss the issues of the day and to comment on something, because I always try to bring my legal training to my work. And when that came out, he looked at me and I looked at him. We stared blank at each other for a while. And we said to ourselves, how could this be happening? But of course, later the explanation came, and whether or not it's believable it's a wholly different issue. But there was an explanation. And I remember in some of our meetings with officers of other ministers, I would constantly raise this up and I would speak out and say, look, these are issues that we have to answer. And I think the elegant silence was a problem. Secondly, I think we underestimated Mahathir. And we underestimated his ability to connect and his ability to weaponize these issues. And I think the third thing is that Barisan Nasional, being Barisan Nasional, a big clumsy elephant, got too comfortable with where it was, because despite the height of the 1MDB scandal, it won two very important by-elections. One was in Kuala Kangsar in Perak State, and one was in Sungai Besar in Selangor State. And then after it was the SEA Games, and everyone thought there was this upswing of support. And no one saw the loss coming. So that is why, in a way, I say Romen's book is a personal reckoning for me, because I constantly ask myself, should people like me have spoke up more? And I think yes, and we didn't. And we paid the ultimate price in defeat. And I think we continue to pay the price of not speaking up.
And I think because of the complexity of 1MDB, and it's still unfolding even until now, which I don't know, is perhaps the deepest complexity and conspiracy in a corporate culture that we probably have seen. I do agree with you, Visual, that late in giving response adds up to the whole debacle of 1MDB. It's not really about the crisis, but how do we address and respond to the crisis will determine the outcome. And if I just want to comment on that, I don't know, it goes all, I think, Romen, you talk about adapt, but what I would like to offer is that, Malaysia is a country where it is blessed, free from crisis, free from natural disaster, free from all of these global and world crises. We're very happy nations. Yeah, so I think that develops the attitude of like being complacent and not to take things seriously. All right, and it has been developed even right now, Visual. I mean, in last December, that the whole country was actually attacking to the government of how poor the government is handling flood in Selangor and in KL area. Why was it in poor giving response? Because again, not only that we did not imagine that flood would happen, but because we are still complacent as a country, the government has been too complacent, that leads into this becoming a greater issue and becoming more difficult to comprehend in the future. So my comment is this. Despite of the complexity of any issue that the Prime Minister or any future Prime Minister would face, what lesson that we could learn from this book is the promise of giving response, the promise of addressing to the media and to the people, and that crisis management skills has to be learned and adapted for every leaders in Malaysia.
Yeah, and also in gaining the initiative early in the dominant narrative, in establishing the dominant narrative. And I remember talking to my family and friends in Singapore as this was unfolding, 1MDB was unfolding in Malaysia. How did we read the sacking of the Attorney General and sacking of the Anti-Corruption Agency chief? We saw it as Najib, the corrupt leader, getting rid of two honest senior civil servants who have enough dirt on him. That's how we read it, and there's a logic to that reading. That's how powerful the dominant narrative was at that time. You know, and it as more and more revelations took place, even you, his close associate, his confidant, to some extent, had doubt. I mean, you said, and I quote you, "I began to question whether Najib was really innocent."
Of course. And because every single day it was a flood of allegations coming out, new revelations on various websites all over the place. How could you not question when you saw so many things? I mean, you had to think to yourself, my gosh, if so many of these people have got so many of these documents making all of these allegations, there might be some truth to it. There might be some truth to it. You know, and that was not just me, but I think the entire government ended up wondering whether there was truth to it. And that caused enormous paralysis within the government because no one wanted to respond. No one wanted to touch it because no one knew for a fact, did this happen? Did it not happen? What the real story was. And even today, I don't think we've still got the real story. We don't really know what actually happened among the various companies and diversions and what have you. You know, that's a big question that still remains today.
But it would appear that you were able to reconcile the conflicts in your head. And you said this, and let me read this part. The initial baseless allegations claiming that he was responsible for bankrupting the country, stealing billions from state coffers, and leading an obscenely lavish lifestyle have been debunked.
Yeah.
I believe that for not keeping track of funds that went into his political and personal accounts, for believing and relying on the words of, as well as allowing trusted individuals who had already been bought over and were secretly conspiring behind his back to manage and transfer funds in and out of these accounts on his behalf, Najib was found guilty in 2020 of corruption in having 42 million ringgit that supposedly belonged to SRC International deposited into his personal bank accounts. In other words, you said he deserves it. I mean, he was guilty of it and he was charged.
Well, in other words, what I'm saying is that he believed what his officials said and as a result followed those actions. And the court found him guilty of that. Yes.
Of that, the 42 million ringgit.
Yes, they found him, the court found him guilty of that. Do I believe that he took the 42 million? No, I do not.
No.
I do not.
Yeah, but you also agreed that it's fair because he is the leader to take the responsibility. I mean, you can't always say, I'm the leader, I'm the Prime Minister, I wasn't informed, therefore I don't know, right? Then you went on to say, interestingly, that is only that, meaning 42 million ringgit.
Yep.
That is only about 0.22%, not even half a percent of the 4.5 billion US dollars, right?
No, 18.4, I think.
Ringgit, 18.4 ringgit.
No, 18.4 billion.
Billion ringgit.
Is it ringgit
Yes,
or
yes,
dollars?
yes. I'm reading a book.
Oh, okay. It's been a while.
I'm not that smart in changing the words like that. That US prosecutors say was supposedly looted from 1MDB. In other words, the figure 4.5 billion, which was initially asserted by the US authorities, it didn't surface after that, right?
Well, yeah.
And yet, after years of investigations by global authorities, and this includes the PH-led MACC, which is the Corrupt Practices Agency, I believe there have been no other charges filed against Najib in relation to receiving, holding, or benefiting from any other monies allegedly belonging to 1MDB.
Yep.
Now, this is quite a categoric statement you're making. How true is it? How correct is this information?
Well, basically, all you have to do is just look around you and look at the various charges that have been filed against Najib. The only charge that has been filed against him against a specific amount of money is 42 million. And what I did was, obviously my heroes as a journalist were Woodward and Bernstein, all the precedence men, Nixon's Watergate, right? And Deep Throat told Woodward and Bernstein, follow the money, which is exactly what I did. I followed the money. Because everyone has this perception. There's this perception that Najib was the mastermind of 1MDB. And I keep telling everyone he was the dupe of 1MDB. He was not the mastermind of it.
So what happened to the 4.5 billion US dollars?
This is a very good question. The governments, the various governments that have come into power have had all this time to find these funds. What we do know is that a yacht has been purchased and sold. Private jets
Jolos.
have been gotten hold of. 700 million has been paid in settlement to the Department of Justice by Jolo. All of that has transpired. Where did all of that money come from? I don't know. But again, none of it has been linked to Najib. And yet, these other individuals have ended up paying hundreds of millions to the Department of Justice, and then it has now come back to the Malaysian government in terms of looted 1MDB funds.
Have you had the chance, Roman, to have a conversation with Tommy Thomas, who was the who prosecuted as in his capacity as Attorney General?
I would love to have a conversation with Tommy Thomas because he did an amazing review of my book. I think he called me a Najib apologist, and he called my book a hagiography. So I must really thank him for taking the time to do that, given that the Prime Minister that appointed him has called Tommy Thomas's book a work of fiction. So, you know. But hey, nonetheless, Tommy Thomas was the Attorney General prosecuting in 2018. And he had put on witness list, he had put Zeti, the bank governor, and Noor Yaakob, a minister in the Prime Minister's department, and Noor Yaakob was involved in that whole 1MDB bond in the first place, getting all that money for 1MDB. He was involved in that bond issue. Right? These two were placed on the list as witnesses against Najib in his trial. Right? But then, all of a sudden, we find out that these two were suddenly removed as witnesses from the case. They were suddenly just removed. No explanation was given. They were just removed. And then we find out now, several years after the prosecution, all of that happened, we find out that the MACC, the anti-corruption guys, had investigated Zeti and investigated Noor Yaakob. And they had found out that Zeti's husband was doing business with Jolo and had gotten close to 195 million US dollars. This is all alleged, by the way. All of this is alleged. Alleged they have gotten $195 million from Jolo, which he conveniently did not deposit in Malaysia, but put it down here in Singapore. In addition to that, Noor Yaakob, the guy who organized 1MDB's bond, also received kickbacks from Jolo, and his money as well was deposited here in Singapore. Singaporean authorities are very clear about these things. They reported them to Bank Negara in 2015. They said, look, these guys have got all of these funds here. And of course, who was governor of Bank Negara in 2015? The wife was governor. So no action was taken. And in 2018, when the MACC came up with all of these documents, suddenly, weeks later, Zeti and Noor Yaakob are removed as witnesses against Najib.
Okay, maybe we shouldn't speculate beyond this point, right? But what strikes me is Singapore is really a village compared to this.
Yeah.
I mean, we have been so preoccupied with Raisa Khan's lie. Seriously. Okay. Okay, let me ask our Malaysian friends. Please don't comment on Raisa Khan, but tell us any further thoughts, anything else to add? YVonne Paul, as a lawyer, Anything to add from a legal perspective?
The only thing I'll say why I guess all my Singaporean friends were captivated by Raisa Khan's lie is because that's the highest level of mischief you can get up to in Singapore.
Yep. we are quite a depraved lot.
And I say this with admiration.
Okay.
Well, I think legally speaking, the cases are in court. The evidence is coming out one way or another. And the government, despite being led by Mr. Najib's party, is still pushing on ahead with the cases, including certain civil cases where they are claiming damages from Mr. Najib for the monies that the government because now 1MDB was always owned by the government anyway.
Yeah.
That the government has lost. But I think, the whole Zeti episode, if we can call it that, allegedly, we have to be very careful on the use of words, clearly goes on to show the tentacles or the alleged tentacles of this alleged Chinese guy from Penang. So in that sense, I think it goes on to show that everyone allegedly was involved in the whole thing. And it doesn't give us much hope and confidence if all of this comes out true as to the very senior leadership of the country, because a lot of these people enjoy pontificating and moralizing about a lot of things, whilst forgetting that they themselves were allegedly involved in a lot of these things. And I think as a lot of this unfold and the investigations, the onus is now on the authorities and the Attorney General to see whether he takes any action against Zeti and Muhammad Yaakob and all of that. I think that's their reckoning.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I do certainly agree. Even though to some extent Najib's case has been decided up to the Court of Appeal, pending to the federal court, and which is quite difficult for the federal court to overturn a unanimous decision of the Court of Appeal. But having said so, still, with the current revelations that's coming onto our news day by day, more people are being targeted. It seems to me and to all of us here in Malaysia that it is not just one person alone, but it has been spiraled into multi-level bureaucrats and people and individual and in the country. And it's just whether we are actually ready to actually know the whole truth. The fact that we don't know the whole truth as we are speaking right now makes us all worried. And it's just being on, you're just so anxious of who's actually next, who's actually going to come out in the newspaper. Yeah. And that is actually not good for the country. But still, I do believe that the investigation has to go on. We have to dig until the best that we can, so that everyone learns a lesson and we know where the money is coming from and where is it going to.
No, I think you're right. There has to be that closure, which is why, Romen, your point about having a process or exercise, a serious exercise in national reconciliation is important. Because this is something that is so difficult to get through and to put it behind you in Malaysia.
I think, that's why as I said in my speech just now, I hope the main message that people get out of this book, especially Malaysians, is the need for a great Malaysian reset. Because the political system has to be reset, the economic system, the socio-economic system has to be reset in the country.
But I think more than that, Romen, I think it strikes me that it's got to go to the soul. A lot more soul searching needs to be done. That's why the process of national reconciliation, where a lot of these painful truths will have to surface, will have to be talked about. I mean, Singapore too. I think, even as I'm reflecting on it, Singapore, we need to reconcile some of the issues. The Marxist conspiracy and a few other things we do. Societies need to come to terms with some of these things. There needs to be closure, otherwise you can't move forward and make those strides forward. I have this question for the three of you, very quick take. We've heard quite a bit about Najib. So who is Najib? Is he Is he the gentleman politician, as you have described him in the book? Or is he a naive politician, blur, disconnected from the ground? Or is he a master tactician who feigns ignorance to win the day? What is he? Who is Najib? Let me start with our Malaysian counterparts. You'll have the last word on this. Yes, Zachary.
I think Najib is a leader and trying to give his level best for the country. I can feel it, not only because reading of this book, but because of my involvement with the government. I was a member of Club UMNO Luar Negara before. So in terms of it's a clear vision of developing the country and the Malaysians, we can feel that. Yeah, he has a vision and he sticks with that. It is just because of this negligence, as we have discussed before, that actually brings him down, that actually taint him with all of these scandals, the lack of advisors, lateness of these things, naive in certain ways. So I think this actually brings him down. But to me, he is still one of the visionary leaders that Malaysia ever had. And I probably will just think of that. And again, what's happening in Johor tomorrow and how he's actually coming back to the political scene or in his nation-building journey is something that we have to see. And if he learns, it's better. And again, we just have to see where is he going to from now and onwards.
Thank you.
Over to you, YVonne.
YVonne Paul?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question. First of all, I would say Najib is earnest and genuine in what he wants to do. And I'll hold that to that two words, regardless of what people say. Because I've known him, I've seen him, and on a lot of engagements that we've done with him early on in his government, he really tried. But at the same time, I think as Roman spoke about, he had to deal with many centrifugal forces in the party, which didn't make it easy. And Malaysia is becoming ungovernable, as he had shown. That's why we had 4 prime ministers in 4 years. But I think at the same time, part of Najib is also that he took the path of least resistance on a number of issues. And I think that is something that if you ask him today, he'll certainly tell you he shouldn't have done. And I think the third aspect is that he is a gentleman. I truly believe that. He is a good tactician as well, as it's seen now how he's helping to Barisan Nasional restore its fortunes. But I think at the same time, he's also very unfortunate because he relied on a lot of people who eventually played him out.
Thank you.
My assessment is that he's all three. He's all three. Position, power was thrust upon him when his father died in 1976, and he ran for his father's seat, his parliamentary seat, at a very, very young age. I think at that point he was the youngest MP to do that, and he rose up the ranks. You can't rise up the ranks if you're not a good tactician, if you're not a survivor. You cannot do that. He is definitely a gentleman, and I'll give you an example. I was at his house in Taman Duta one morning. He had a cabinet meeting that was supposed to start at 8:30 in the morning. He was already late for the cabinet meeting. He was leaving the house, and as he was leaving the house, his motorcade was located, just in the porch, and outside the house there is a fence, and there were a huge number of people standing out there with envelopes. They were all standing out there with envelopes. I was wondering, who are these guys, right? And I asked one of the security. They said, "Oh, these are Malaysians. Basically, they've got petitions. Whether they don't have a proper water supply, they need to get their kids into secondary school or what have you." They were all standing there, and these were aunties, uncles. I mean, you'd see the whole range: Chinese, Malay, all of these guys standing out there with petitions. So Najib walks down the stairs to the car. And then he takes a look and he sees all of these guys standing out there. Immediately, he heads towards them. His security attempt to stop him. He says, no, no, no. He heads to the gate, gets them to open the gate. He goes outside and he talks to each and every, effectively he's doing a triage outside his house. He's late for cabinet meeting. He's now super late, but he goes through every single individual. Everyone gives him, he stands there, he listens to what they have to say, takes their letter, gives it to his officer, says, look, ask this department to take a look at that, process that. He tells the individual, look, we will look into it, we will get you a response on this issue. He finished off every single individual before he got back into the car and headed to Putrajaya. That represents Najib to me. He is, and this is why even today, in places like Malacca, Johor, he resonates with the people because he is a people person and he really cares for the people. And Vishwa, there was no media there was no one taking pictures, there was nothing. It was literally him talking to all of these individuals.
And this sort of leads to my favorite part of your book, you know. Your conversation at his home the day after the results of the fatal GE14, right? I think it was 10th of
May, yeah.
Now,
11th of May. It was 11th of May.
11th of May. Yeah. And let me read 3 short excerpts. Three short conversations, right? The first one was you trying to persuade him to have an extended vacation, right? I then asked Najib, sir, are you planning to go on vacation? Not at the moment, but I will do soon. Why? He asked. I said, I think it would be good if you took a short break as it is unclear what Mahathir intends to do to you. And his response, I'm not worried, Romen. I haven't done anything wrong, so he can try to do whatever he wants to me. It's okay. I have nothing to hide. We have the rule of law in Malaysia. I'm not going to run away. I have no reason to, he said. And you said, if I were you, I would consider going on a longer holiday immediately and get away from Mahathir's clutches, I said. And his reply here is very telling. No, Romen, that's not the way. I actually, since I'm going to be away for the weekend, I think it will be a good idea to let people know I will be away. I don't want to give the impression that I'm running away. I'll get them to send it out this evening, he said. Yeah. This is the first part. And then while you are there, the second conversation takes place, right? Najib received a call from Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong when you were there. Unlike many others who were fair weather friends, Lee was one of the few world leaders who bothered to call Najib following the appointment of Malaysia's 7th Prime Minister. Lee thanked Najib for the warm and close working relationship that led to several bilateral successes in the preceding years and to wish Najib well on his future endeavors. Najib, who also wished Lee the best of luck, appeared touched by the gesture because both men had negotiated hard in the intervening years to come up with win-win solutions for both countries, following decades of Mahathir's Cold War-like impasse on issues with its southern neighbor. After the call, Najib said, and I quote, I wished Hsien Loong luck because he is going to need it to deal with the old man. I'm sure Mahathir will want to resurrect the crooked bridge. That's a Freudian slip. Did I say that? Sorry. The crooked bridge. And all the other projects that the government couldn't afford. And that brings me, to the third conversation. Looking wistfully out the window, Najib said, you know, Hsien Loong wished me well on the future and I have been thinking about what I want to do next. And if I don't continue in politics, I might want to look at a good cause that I can champion, which will not only benefit Malaysians, but can be regional or global in nature. I'm not interested in fighting Mahathir. I want to look at something global. And when Mahathir's government collapses in a few months or years, as it surely will once people realize who they have put back into power, I would be happy to play an advisory or supporting role to a new BN government. And then this is what you said here. I left Najib, who was by then playing with his grandson, slightly after noon on 11th of May, 2018. That was the last time I saw him. I flew out of Kuala Lumpur that afternoon.
Yep.
Extremely well put, and please give him a hand. And that naturally goes to the way, the classical way you ended the book, right? Now, let me read that to you. I have always known that Najib had the fire within him to fight, and the country had seen that he would fight. I think Najib's enemies, all those who conspired against him, including those within UMNO, should be worried because he will not give up and he will not give in. And I'm certain he will triumph in the end. His enemies should be afraid. I would be. Now, very clearly you're besmitten by this man. At some point while reading the book, I was going to call you and say, go get a room, man. I saw something that was verging on bromance. No, but there was a lot of adulation, there was a lot of affection that you had no inhibitions conveying. And I admire that.
No, I was going to say, and why not? Because from what I saw, from what I witnessed, he was a gentleman. He had the best interest of the country at heart. And that is, if you ask me, that's part of leadership, having the heart to help people and being honorable. In his negotiations with Singapore on the issue of the railway land and what have you, this was something that had been stymied by Mahathir for over 20 years. A deal had been signed by Daim Zainuddin, Mahathir's finance minister, in 1990, the day before Lee Kuan Yew stepped down. 20 years later, Mahathir has still refused to implement the deal. It was only Najib who stepped in and then negotiated a proper deal with Singapore. Because he did the gentlemanly thing, the honorable thing, which is to honor your promise. You can't just sign a document and then just pretend that it doesn't exist. No, because I don't like it anymore. If you sign something, you have to act on it. You have to do the honorable thing, and Najib did the honorable thing. So yes, I wouldn't go so far as saying it's a romance, but I definitely admire Najib.
Yeah. So let me ask the question that's on some people's minds. How much were you paid?
I wish I was paid whatever it is people think I was paid. Because at that point, we would be having this on my private jet or my yacht. Unfortunately, the only money I'm going to be making is the money that Nora, my publisher, is going to give me from royalties of this book.
Who is Nora?
Nora, please. Where is she?
That's there you go. Nora. Hi. Okay. But more seriously, on hindsight, was there any moment or any part of the book that you feel now on hindsight that you could have been more objective, perhaps more journalistic in terms of integrity? Did you feel that at any point you were swayed by your personal feelings for him?
That's a very good question. And that is the question I kept asking myself over and over again when I wrote the book in the first place. And what the book is effectively my take, what I saw and how I felt at that specific time, at that point, at that juncture, at that event itself. And that was what the book was aimed at doing. It was aimed at chronicling that. Did I cover things up? No, I didn't. Did I, airbrush stuff? No, I didn't. Because if I had done any of that, there would have been uproar, there would have been protests, there would have been lawsuits, there would have been all kinds of stuff.
So here's a technical question, right? For everyone. There's a lot of quotations. There are a lot of quotations, including what I read to you just now. Quotations of exact words used by Najib. Were you having a tape recorder?
Yes.
And having all these conversations with him, because it's verbatim, right?
Yes, I had a tape recorder. And
with his permission?
With his permission. Because the idea was that I was going to ghostwrite a book for him, which we did. We wrote a book on his ideals, on what he wanted to achieve in Malaysia, all of this. He didn't have the time to do it, so I told him, sir, we've got a brilliant idea. If you don't have the time to write it, we have got a tape recorder. I'm going to ask you the questions. You give me the answers. We will use your words verbatim and convert that into a book. Jia, this is a point for you, by the way. So, this is what we did. So or rather I sat down with him. I don't know how many sessions. I mean, there were so many sessions. I sat down with him. Even once I sat in his car as he was driving to a function, and asked him questions. And basically he downloaded himself. Yeah. And that's why you've got all of these quotes. In the end, the book, funnily enough, didn't get published. And why didn't the book get published? Because it was all just finished. Everything was all done just before the 1MDB scandal happened. And once that happened, everything got shelved. Everything got shelved.
So it's 8:30. Jaya, could we extend it by 10 minutes? Right? Is there anyone here who has any question or comment or an observation? A quick one. Anyone? Don't say I didn't ask. Yes, please. Identify yourself. You can remove your mask.
Okay. Hi, good evening. I'm Yati. So I'm quite interested in Malaysian politics because I myself have a lot of relatives on the other side of the border. So actually, right, I was wondering, in a lot of discussions of 1MDB, there is another figure that comes into play, and that is none other than Rosmah. So I'm just curious, what is your take on Rosmah's alleged involvement in 1MDB?
That is a question, I'm surprised it has taken this long for that question
to come up. That's the second book coming up.
I'm surprised because, everyone is just fascinated by Rosmah. I mean, and they're fascinated by the stories of her handbags and what have you. It's all fascinating. But from what I saw, I never saw her actually involved in any of these discussions. Whenever I had discussions with Najib, whenever I met with him, she was never in the room in these discussions. So a lot of this is also perception, is the creation of perception that, she's the one in charge. I mean, I will be the first one to admit my wife is in charge, yes, in my household. I would assume it's the same in Najib's household as well. But do I think she was involved in government policy? Do I think she was involved in these things? Not from what I could see. But again, it was only what I saw. I hope that answers your question.
Any other comment, observation?
So I addressed this to Romen, who's an old friend. It's a great read. I went through 100 pages in 3 hours. I normally don't do that, right? So it's a page turner. So congratulations on that. A lot of what you say, I tended to agree with, of my own analysis of how Najib's period, at least for me, saw some improvement or attempted at least an improvement with inter-ethnic relations. Post-Hindraf in 2007, his attempt to incorporate at least some of it, I get that sense of it. At the same time, I seem to agree a little with how Tommy Thomas actually described you as an apologist. Because at the end of it, it seems you have a soft spot in which you're not allowing yourself to blame the Prime Minister, beyond the fact of saying you're really blur. And I'm reminded of Manmohan Singh a little, right, in the Indian case, where he's surrounded by all these people who are corrupt, right? And he is a clean guy. I'm not sure I can extend that exactly to Najib, but what I'm trying to say is, I think that you go out of your way of trying to protect this man, because I think there are so many times that I see that this man should be stepping in, even if it's a matter of Rosma, right? When somebody comes up and say, 42 billion sudah hilang, if people on the street do not already have a sense that there is some corruption going on, and that some corruption is connected to the family, they wouldn't have bit it to the degree that they did. And I'm just wondering whether you should have been slightly more balanced on that.
Thank you for the question. I mean, and it is a very fair question. My writing of the book was effectively my assessment of the situation. If you believe I was not hard-hitting enough, thank you for that view. I believe I was sufficiently hard in my assessment, because I wrote it based on what I saw. And it's very fair to say, people wouldn't have an idea that the family is corrupt if it wasn't, or what have you. But unfortunately, the reality of the situation was the system itself was so corrupt for so many years. So it's not necessarily just perception of a family. It is perception of the entire system. It's perception of the government. It was a loss of confidence that average Malaysians had in the government itself. It was not just confidence in Najib, but in BN itself, because of the rent-seeking, the way the NEP was exploited and abused. All of this had happened long before Najib took over as Prime Minister, and all of that contributed to the population, to the people's perception that the BN government was so corrupt, and had to be toppled. And what have you. So anything further just added to it, It was that kind of a scenario. So I wrote, as I said, it looking at all of that. And do I have regrets? Yes, I've got a lot of regrets. And one of my biggest regrets was not pushing hard enough. When I saw things happening, I did not push hard enough. So that, yes, is my regret. If that is viewed as an apologist, I think everyone has to take responsibility for what happened. Everyone who helped the BN side has to take responsibility, political, responsibility for what happened, in GE14 itself.
If I could just chime in as well, I had the same concerns when I was reading it. It's actually very difficult for a person who's been engaged to be the brand consultant of someone to be totally objective. I'm being realistic here. Which is why there are books and there are books and there are books, right? There are many, many books written by close confidants. Do we expect those books to be absolutely objective? Impossible. Because those people are writing from their perspective, from their relationship, based on their relationship, and therefore their understanding that comes through their relationship. And then there are books that are written by academics who don't have any relationship with them, but they are looking at a scan. But each book serves a different purpose. So I think we have to be fair, and that's what I told myself when I was reading this book. Am I reading this book as a book written by a university professor about the historic events? No, because a lot of those books are quite unreadable. Okay? With a whole lot of footnotes and they don't take a position. But when I read a book like this, he makes it very clear from the start what his relationship is. He made it clear right from the start that he was engaged directly by by the Prime Minister and not by the party, not by the government. Therefore, his relationship is one-on-one with the man. How objective can he be? So my expectation of his absolute objectivity goes down. But I'm reading it as one perspective, not necessarily as the perspective. But I think we are all better off allowing ourselves the benefit of multiple perspectives. I think that's what's missing in countries like Singapore. We just have one narrative. But there's nothing wrong with multiple narratives coexisting. We should not see subsequent narratives as counter-narratives. They are add-on narratives that gives us the opportunity to become better citizens and better observers. That's the way I would see it.
Cheers.
Right. Jaya, you had a question.
You wonderfully summarized what I was going to say myself.
Okay. That's why we are friends, you know. This is called groupthink. Yeah. Now, I would like to give the last word to our two panelists from Malaysia. I have this very specific question for you all. Going back to Romen's final lines in the book, do you believe that Najib would come back as a future Prime Minister?
Well, since Zokri started, I will let him have the last say in the introductions earlier. Well, I think anything is possible in politics, and anything is definitely possible in Malaysian politics, as we've seen in the last 4 years. But I think that the legal problems, or rather the conviction in the High Court, which has been affirmed by the Court of Appeal, remain a real problem for him. But something comes to mind that he could eventually be pardoned. It's the same way Anwar Ibrahim was pardoned. And the same way Lim Guan Eng of the DAP had criminal charges against him, and those charges were subsequently dropped after the general election. His famous words were, "My party won, so that shows that the people don't believe the allegations against me." So tomorrow, if Barisan Nasional wins, that same thought process can happen as well. So possible, definitely possible.
To be the Prime Minister, I echo with YVonne. Politics is very much fluid in Malaysia. Yep. But I think if he cannot be the Prime Minister and he is still steadfast of becoming a statesman or a leader of the people, from what he has been shown, I think there is still a chance. And again, Malacca and Johor are showing that, why these people are still welcoming him. There must be something that he has done in the past that resonates to these people. So again, anything could happen in our political career and political journey. But if Najib Razak still wants to be remembered as a leader of the people or a statesman, as someone who has a vision for the country, he still have a chance to do it. That's all.
Yeah, and he hasn't reached 96 yet.
Yes, exactly. That's the age in Malaysia.
That's the benchmark already set. He's actually a babe in the woods,
He's very young, spring chicken.
Yeah, very, very young. Maybe too young. Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to end by saying this. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. It's a very readable book, interesting anecdotes, the amount of details, just amazing. I mean, the journalist in you, I salute. Really, you should read it just for the details, right? As a fellow Singaporean, I'm very proud that what you have achieved in making it into the innermost sanctum. I don't know whether you've gone beyond what has been described here, but he has taken you into his confidence, and that's no easy. It's something to be proud of, and you earned the trust, because there were a lot of people who didn't quite appreciate you, right? And understandably, you're not from there, you know, and you come from somewhere else, and then you are in the inner sanctum, and many of them feel displaced, but you still managed 6 years. That's quite amazing. And you came up with plans, with concepts, with ideas that were well researched. You know, I don't get the sense that you were driven by money and how much you were paid. You were driven by a cause. And I think you made Singapore proud. You made us proud by what you achieved, and you were there for all the major crises. You know, you were there for MH370, MH17, Bersih, 1MDB, and GE14. You know? So, this book is as much about your belief, your tenacity, your triumphs and tribulations. What else did I say? Okay, let me end by saying this. As a journalistic piece, it gives a different perspective with its own logic. If, however, before, during, or after reading the book, you choose to define it as fiction, it is still a compelling read. So it's worth buying the book. Okay? So, Final Reckoning to me is one man's credible, thought-provoking account of a prime minister he believes could bring back the glory of One Malaysia and the spirit of Negara Ku. Congratulations, Romen, and thank you. Please join me in thanking our Malaysian friends. And thank you for making this a successful launch. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sadasivan and panelists, for a very engaging and enlightening session. Can we have another round of applause for them, please? Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of this evening's book launch. The author, Mr. Romen Bose, will stay back to autograph copies of Final Reckoning. If you wish to buy a copy of the book to be autographed, you may do so. It's over there. Thank you for participating in this evening's book launch. Have a great weekend and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.